Today you're joining me on the new Junction Canal near Doncaster. This is a fantastic stretch of water. It's 525 pegs I think that's on the length, and it's almost in a direct straight line. A brilliant match water. It's full of roach, skimmers and perch, and you can catch these fish fishing with squats. Squats are just tiny little maggot type, a bait that's very small but brilliant for catching these type of fish with squats. So I'm going to be fishing with squats over groundbait. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ball in some groundbait at the start and create an area in the peg that I can fish over, and then loose feed squats over the top. You're not fishing very far out because this venue slopes away all the time, and you need to fish quite close to the bank where it's around about 8 foot deep. So it's a perfect place to fish like this. Now, today's session, I'm hoping that as the session goes along that I'm going to catch plenty of fish and just show you the different ways of catching them. You can catch them sometimes shallow, sometimes on the bottom. It depends how the fish want to feed on the day. We've got a nice tinge of colour to the water. It's going into autumn time, and this should be great fishing. Yesterday I invited you into my tackle room to show you how I prepare rigs, lines and hooks for this type of fishing. The two floats that I'm going to use on the canal are a new pattern by Drennan, the Silverfish 1s and Silverfish 2s, or as we've put on the floats, SF 1s and SF 2s. The SF 1s are a thin type float. They're a quite thin body, which for fishing shallow is absolutely perfect because you don't want a bulbous body. You want very little resistance to the float when you're fishing up in the water. So it's just a thin type body. Now these floats are fantastic for fishing like this because they've also got a titanium stem. Now a titanium stem is a wire stem, but it's sort of in between normal stainless wire and carbon. Now what you get, because it's in between weight, it sits on the line very well. Also, you can't bend the stem at all on the float. The stem doesn't bend. You can bend it as much as you want and it springs back to what it is. So the float, it's very difficult to destroy. But what it is, it never tangles. It never, when you're fishing very quickly, occasionally you'll get the float with a stainless stem flick over the line and it becomes a bit frustrating. It'll only happen now and again, but because this material is a little bit lighter, it just sits on the line much better. The other good thing with these floats also, the detachable bristles. You can take out the bristle. So you can use a yellow bristle or a black bristle or whatever you want. You can also trim the bristles down shorter. So if you want a shorter bristle that sets very quickly, you can cut the bristle down. If you look at the SF2s, that's a very handy thing to have, because when you've got a long float like that, it takes time to settle. And when you're fishing quickly, cutting the actual bristle down so it's shorter, the float just settles much quicker. So you can cut the bristle down and you're not destroying the float. You can replace it again with a new bristle. So that's the float itself. Now where I set it up for fishing up shallow, you want the float, once it gets in the water, to set. You don't want it half the body to be showing. So what I do, rather than showing you by putting shots on and everything, I've got a rig here that I've actually used at some stage on the canal. And what I tend to do, if I just shallow that up a little bit, I have a block of shots about a foot below the float, and you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 number 12 shot. It's 010 diameter line. It's just the suplex, normal suplex 107 or 010 as I call it, 010 line. So it's quite a light main line. When you're fishing with small floats, you don't want an heavy main line because it affects how the float fishes. You want an 010 main line is about right. So I've got this block of shot, so that actually sets the float. Once the float goes in, that sets the float. So it'll set it almost to what it will be once the other shots settle. There'll only be a small amount of the float showing. But then below what I've got 5 number 12s. So them 5 number 12s are actually presenting the hook bait on the drop. They're keeping everything nice and tight. What I'll probably do is flick the rig over so everything's in a tight arc. And once you hold on to the float, it sort of keels with the shot and you see the bite very well. So that's the shallow rig. It's quite simple. I've just got 5 number 12s dropping through the water and then the block of shot to set the float. These fish I'm sure will come very, very shallow tomorrow because everywhere I fish, because it's so warm, the temperatures are up, fish are very, very close to the surface. Now what I probably will do is still fish with a long line above the actual rig. I'll probably fish 3 or 4 foot of line above the float, because when you're catching a lot of fish quickly, you can ship back. You're not shipping back too many sections, break off and swing the fish in quickly. It's all about when you're squat fishing, you're catching usually quite small fish, roach, maybe a few skimmers, and you want to swing those fish to hand very quickly. So fishing too short a line can make you a lot slower. So if you can get away, if there's not so much wind, as I hope there isn't, you can get away with fishing quite a long line and be quite aggressive. You can ship back and swing the fish in with maybe a top 4 of the pole. So that's the shallow rig. The other rig that I'd set up is a 0.5 in the same float, and this is for fishing off bottom. I want the shots to go through the water quite quickly, and I'll have some lighter shots at the bottom of the rig and probably have it just strung out over a length of line. I mean, this is just a rig out of my box. Because I put all my shots on the line with pliers and I also slide all the shot up the line, it makes my rigs very versatile. So a rig like this, I can move all the shots up the line very easily. So I can actually string all the shot out. If you were to put them on and not move them, it makes it difficult to move the shot. But you can see I can move these shots without damaging the line at all, because these have been put on with pliers and then moved up the line and maybe the bottom metre of line cut off. So all my rigs are very versatile, so I can actually turn what I've got a bolt rig into a strung out rig very simply by just moving all the shot up and creating a nice line of shot to fish through the water. And that's what I'd probably do with this rig. So I'd create a nice arc that I can fish through the water, maybe about a foot off bottom. So that's the 2 rigs I'd set up for fishing shallow, fishing off bottom. The next rig would be the most aggressive rig for fishing down onto where the ground bait is, where it's 8 foot deep. You want to get down to those fish quite quickly. So I'd probably use a 0.6 if it were quite difficult. That's a fly I've got flying around in my tackle room, not good. I'd use either a 0.6 or a 0.8. A 0.8 would get me down to the fish very quickly. If it's more difficult, I'll probably use a 0.6. And I'd just fish this quite simply. I'd have a block of shot and then just 2 droppers, probably 2 number 10 droppers and a block of shot on both rigs. And this is because I want to get down onto the top of the ground bait quickly. Even though I'm fishing with squats, if you fish too light fishing down, you'd get pestered with fish off bottom. So I want to get down to those fish as quick as I can to catch them. And I'd probably loose feed squats quite heavy to try and keep the fish down to start with. The 0.8 rig would be the one that I'd be hoping that I'd catch on, because obviously 0.8 would get down there very, very quickly. And if you can get away with fishing double squat, you'd catch the fish a lot quicker than what you would fishing, with the lighter float. So the 0.8 would be the one that I'd want to be fishing with at the start of the session. Now that's floats covered. I mean, I fish it very, very simply. I stick to just 2 patterns of floats for fishing like this. I'd probably set up 4, maybe 5 rigs, but 4 rigs would cover most of the fishing I'd want to do on the day. The hooks that I'd select would be slightly different because it's summertime and there's a lot of fish about, as I've been told, on the canal at the moment. The hooks that I'd select would be slightly different to what I normally use. So I'll just tidy this away and we'll just have a quick look at the hooks that I'll use probably tomorrow. The normal hook I'd use for fishing with squats and pinkies are just Camasam B511s. I mean, these have probably been used millions of times fishing with squats on our canal. They're a brilliant hook for it. But when there's a lot of fish, I'm expecting, I've heard that the canal's fishing very well, and I'm expecting to catch a lot of fish tomorrow. So I'm going to change up slightly. But the thing with B511s, you have to use a disgorger quite a lot, because the hook is quite, not soft, but will bend if you're unhooking fish aggressively all the time. So I'm not going to use B511s. I'll have some tied up just in case the fishing's difficult, but I prefer to use a carbon match hook. Now, Drennan Carbon Match, they're a microbarb hook, and they're slightly turned in points. The point is turned in a little. And I find them that I think they're absolutely brilliant for this type of fishing. I lose very, very few fish off them, and I find I can be more aggressive with a hook like this and swing fish to hand a lot easier. So the hook I'm going to use tomorrow is a carbon match in 20s and 22s. The 22s I'll probably use with squat, single squat, double squat. And the 20s, if I can catch a lot of fish on pinkies, and maybe even double pinky, I'll probably step up to a carbon match 20. So that's the hooks I'm going to use. Now the line that they're tied to, I always now use fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is a fantastic line. In the Supplex fluorocarbon, you can swing fish in very, very easily with it. I mean, fish up to 3 or 4 ounce you can swing in with the 075, you know, easily. The other thing with fluorocarbon, what you get when you're fishing double squat is you get quite a lot of twist of the bait. Now, fluorocarbon doesn't twist. It's not the same as normal monofilament. Normal monofilament is a little bit softer, and it tends to spin. And even when you're fishing with bloodworm in winter, the fluorocarbon is massive, because when you put a bloodworm on the hook, you tend to hook it just behind the head, and it creates a bit of a propeller type action. And of course, with normal monofilament, you get loads of spin ups. With the fluorocarbon, you don't. Now, it's difficult to tie fluorocarbon. You have to wet the knot very well. I mean, I'll tie an hook up on it, but you need to wet the knot very well. I mean, I tie all my hooks by hand, and I use a magnifying glass because I want to get everything with the whipping of the hook very neat. I always use a magnifying glass, and I put quite a lot of turns on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 turns. Right, I always then wet the actual line, and then with fluorocarbon you need to pull it through quite carefully, and then also pull up to the hook quite carefully. If you over pull it, you will break it, but that's tied that hook nicely. With a pair of scissors, then I just cut it off, and then I can put that onto my winder as such. But if you're careful with fluorocarbon and just pull it up nicely, wet the line very well, you can tie them quite easily. And I have a little gadget that I use that's just really a couple of nails that's adjustable, and I set it slightly longer, and I just put 2 turns on with a loop tire. Trim that off. I always use loop to loop, and with squats I always use 150mm hook lengths. So hook lengths I just store on Cresta winders at the moment into a box, so I can take that out on the bank. I'm not opening a box all the time, and use it off a winder. So that's the hooks and line that I'm going to use tomorrow in the session, and hopefully I'll fish with different baits. Hopefully I can catch on pinkies. White pinkies and white squats is what I'll hopefully be using, and if I can catch on, you know, double squat and catch a lot of fish, that'll be even better, or a double pinky and a 20 hook to catch, you know, even bigger weight. But we'll see how tomorrow's session goes. But I've done the rigs, I've tied some hooks, and I'm virtually ready to go. The only other real thing that I need to talk about is elastics for squat fishing. Now, there's only two elastics I use for this type of fishing, and that's a number 4 Preston and a number 3 Preston. Now, you'll be quite interested to know that I fish both elastics through just a number 1 section, so just the top section of my acolyte pole. And the reason for this is you can swing fishing much easier. When you've got 2 sections of elastic, the elastic tends to come out of the pole, and you finish up with too much elastic to be aggressive to swing the fish in. Now, you might think, well, what happens if you hook a bigger fish? Often when you've only got 1 section of elastic, you've got more control over the fish if you hook a bigger fish. If you've got more elastic, what I usually find is if you hook a fish like a big chub or something like that, because they can get speed up and run away from you, they break you anyway. So I've had more bigger fish out with 1 section of elastic than what I actually have when I fish with 2, when I've been fishing with squats and other baits. So one section of elastic's a great way to fish. The other advantage as well, the elastic works very well. It never ever hangs out of the pole. It returns inside the pole very well. And the reason for this is because when you've only got 1 section, you've not got as much elastic to trap on the side of the pole. Also, my acolyte pole, the bore is quite big, and also the bore in the end of the actual PTFE bush is quite small, so the elastic works extremely well. You'll notice also that I use normal elastic connection, the plastic connectors. Jan do a connector that's nice and small and neat, and I prefer these to using the Dacron because I know that it sits out from the end of the pole each time, so you get very few laps round the end of the pole. In fact, next to no laps round the end of the pole when you're catching the fish. So that's how I set the elastic up. Just 1 section, a number 3 is what I'd probably use for shallow fishing. When you're fishing slightly bigger floats, the 0.6 and the 0.8s, fishing on the bottom, I'll use the number 4. So that's the 2 elastics that I'll select for tomorrow. Keep it quite simple. If you're fishing with smaller hooks, fishing with the 511s and fishing with 24s, even 22s in the 511s, I may drop down to a number 2 elastic, but this is quite rare. I mean, squat fishing's often done in the summertime anyway for me, and the 3s and 4s works very well. So that's the elastics that I'll select for me fishing tomorrow. Today I'm squat fishing on the canal, loose feeding squats over an area of groundbait. The 2 groundbaits I've selected, the 3000 classic roach and also the 3000 super canal black, I find them down with a fine flower sieve type riddle. So what I've got 2 kilos of very fine groundbait now. The reason I find it down is because if you leave the bigger particles in it, I'm wanting to use a very dry mix today, so when I ball in, as it goes down, it explodes and covers the bottom. So I can feed squats over a nice area. When you feed squats, they always spread out, so you don't want too tight an area of groundbait. And of course, this fine groundbait, because when it lays on the bottom, if you mixed it with the bigger particles in dry, what had happened, the bigger particles would lift up off the bottom, and that would spoil the fishing because the fish would come up and they'd drift away with the particles. So fining it down is a big part of getting the groundbait right. So that's the 2 groundbaits I've selected. Now the other additives I'm also going to add to this also enhance the groundbait. One thing that I always like to add to my groundbaits for roach fishing is just our normal brown crumb. And that's just using 2 pints of brown crumb. So I'm putting that into the mix as well. The other thing that might surprise you, and something that we've always done on the new Junction Canal, it's something that the Barnsley team, the Barnsley Blacks, have always added to the groundbait when we fished on the canal, is leam. And that might surprise you, but I think what leam does, it makes the groundbait heavy, so it goes down so far, but of course the leam helps the groundbait to break down very quickly. So that's also added just two pints of natural Sensus Tiers de Somme, which I'm just going to add into the mix as well. Now, there's other things what I'm going to add to the ground bait what I've not really used much on this canal before, but when we fished in Belgium, on a big canal in Belgium, fishing with bloodworm in the World Championships, there were two other additives that we felt made a massive difference to add to the ground bait. And one's coriander. Coriander, what I've got at home, I've got some fine coriander seeds, and all I've done, I've put them through a blender, and I've just got 250 ml of coriander, what I'm going to mix to the ground bait. Now this is quite active, it does create some activity, but when we fished in Belgium, it were a great additive to put in the ground bait. So it's something that I've started using since Belgium, because it made a big difference there to catch the roach. So I'm going to add that to the mix also. The other thing that we also used in Belgium was grilled hemp. Now this is Sensus grilled hemp, and all I've done, I've boiled the kettle at home, and I've got the grilled hemp, about half a bag, about 500 grams, maybe 400 grams. And I've then wetted that down with some boiling water. I've added boiling water to that. So the grilled hemp that I've soaked overnight, this is I boiled the kettle, put it on to cover all of the grilled hemp, and then just left it overnight. This can go straight into the ground bait and mix it in. It'll need extra water, but this is just the start. Now that's just starting to bind together. It's not quite right yet. That'll just need to be left now for maybe about 20-25 minutes while I finish rigging up. Once I've rigged up, I'll come back to that and just add a little bit more water. So I'm going to say I want this mix to be quite dry, because when I throw it in, I want it to go down and explode near the bottom. So I'll just leave that to take on some of the water, get the rest of my equipment done, and then I'll come back and finish it off and we're ready to go. One of the big things to get right when you're fishing a canal, the new Junction Canal tends to slope away from you all the time. And if you're fishing in too deep a water, it's not good for roach. You want to be in around about 8 foot of water. Now the peg I'm actually on today is probably one of the only few where it's quite a very slow slope. I've fished on parts of the canal, especially further up at Went End, where it's very aggressive, and that's when it's important to get to the right depth. I'm looking for around 8 foot of water is very good for roach. So I'm just going to put a plummet on this rig. I've already actually plumbed this rig up and set it, so it should be set at dead depth. Right, once the plummet's dropped in and lowered down, the float should just about sit just above the water, which is what it is doing. It's just about dead depth there. Right, so I'm happy that I've set the rig to dead depth. If I go further out, it gets a little bit deeper, not a lot, but it just gets that little bit deeper. And if I come closer in, it gets slightly shallower, as you can see. So I'm fishing on a very slow slope. Now what I've done, I've plumbed up and I've found where I want to fish, where it's around about 8 foot deep. And what I've done, because I'm mid-section, I've actually marked the pole in front of my hand. So all I've done, I've got some Tipp-Ex and I've just dotted around the pole. Now the thing about putting dots on like that, you can easily scratch them off after and it doesn't damage your pole at all. So I've just dotted exactly where I want to be fishing. Now this also helps when I'm balling in the ground bait to be accurate, because this, I can then look at where my hand is and place the pole in the rest for balling in. So I found the depth I want to fish at. I'm starting at dead depth. Now that's just a starting point. I might want to fish slightly over depth. Even with squat, fishing 2 or 3 inch on the bottom can be very good. Or I might want to come off the bottom. And what I've done, I've actually set up 4 different rigs for the session today. Got one that's probably set a foot off bottom, that's a strung out rig, and then I've got other rigs for fishing down to the bottom right on top of the ground bait. So that's just about plumbing up. The line above the float, again, I've not got too short. I've got probably about, I don't know, close to 2.5 foot of line above the float. I want the float to go in and relax. If you have too short a line on the rig, you tend to move the float at times, especially if there's any wind at all. And a lot of the time I'll flick the rig out either side of the pole and maybe sometimes flick it out past, so I'll be slightly off bottom at times, and also fishing on the drop all the while. The main thing is to get the plumbing right and find the right depth. Now what I always work on, I'm about sort of 6 foot tall, and what I do, I have a sort of a set where when I stand and set the float is about the right depth for roach. So I've got the depth right, I've got everything set up. I'm fishing very, very small hooks, just 22, a barbless hook I'm going to try to start with because I want the bait presentation to be very good. And I'm just going to start single or double squat and just see what I catch after I've balled in. So we'll have a look now at what I'm going to ball in for the ground bait, how I'm going to actually ball it in, because even it's not just a case of make the balls and throw them in. I'll talk you through that. I've got the ground bait mixed now and everything's ready for me to ball in. What I'm going to add to the ground bait is not a massive amount of bait. Because I'm loose feeding, I'm relying on the ground bait to keep the fish in the peg. So all I'm going to do, just to kick off the swim, I'm just going to add just a nice handful of squats. Not so many at all. But because I'm putting live bait, I'm also putting a few pinkies as well just in the mix. Because I'm putting live bait into the ground bait, I'm not using dead maggots or anything like that, just straightforward squats and a few pinkies. And then some hemp, just a handful of hemp as well in it. Right, because I've put live bait into the ground bait, I'm actually going to squeeze the balls and introduce them as I make them up. Now the first 4 balls that I'm going to make, all I'm going to do, I'm just going to give 2 squeezes. Right, so that when it enters the water, this starts to break almost immediately. So I'll throw 4 balls in like that. The next 4 balls that I'm going to introduce, I'm going to squeeze very hard. Right, what I've done, I've thrown 4 soft ones in, but now the 4 hard ones I want to break down on the bottom much slower. So these I'm going to squeeze up very tight. I've got the 4 balls I've introduced that will go down to the bottom and create the area. These other 4 balls will break down slowly just to release the squats that's in it nice and steady. Probably over the next sort of hour or so, it'll take quite a bit of time to break down. Because it's dry, it really does hold together quite well. Now I'm making sure that these balls are squeezed up. I'm also trying to just keep the ground bait just fractionally back from the pole tip. So I've now created a nice area to fish over. And then what I'll do, I'll loose feed over that area and start fishing. Probably starting just dead depth and then maybe trying just off bottom or just on bottom depending on how the session goes. after a very short period I realised that I just weren't getting down quick enough. So I've bulked all the shot. I've got a 0.8 float on, a Drennan SF1 float. And what I've got all my shot bulked right on the top of a 6-inch hook length. Now this might sound ridiculous, fishing with such a small bait as squats. I'm actually fishing pinkies on hook at the minute, just to be a little bit more selective. But because I've blocked it right on the top, I'm getting straight down onto the top at groundbait. And if I don't get a bite, all I've got to do is sort of lift the float back up, and you can see it's sat up immediately. The fish are just off bottom, but they're wanting it passing them. But of course, to fish with a normal rig, with a block and a couple of droppers, as you normally would if you wanted to get down quickly, it's just not aggressive enough. There's too many smaller fish above taking the bait. So I've actually blocked the shot right on top of hook length, and I'm putting the rig in directly with the float landing right on top of where bulk's going in. So literally it's going down and cocking immediately. Now if I don't get a bite like this chuck, all I've got to do is sort of lift it up and drop it back down, and often the float pops back up and there's one on. I missed that bite, but so they're obviously just off bottom, these fish. They're probably this much off bottom, but they want the bait actually passing them. So a real quick to change. You can see it stamp at fish is fantastic. The sort of these will really weigh. They're like sort of 2 to 3 ounce size fish. And that's a great fish when you're fishing with squats, a great stamper fish. You can build a weight really quickly because you've been aggressive, you're dropping straight down to them and coming back with a fish as quick as what you could ever do. I mean, catching fish fast is all about speed of bite. The quicker you get a bite, the quicker you can come back with a fish. So it's not about anything other than speed of bite really, because look at stamper, that fantastic fish. So it's not like a normal squat type way of fishing this. I've got, so I say, a big block right on top of a 6-inch hook length, just trying to get down to the fish as quick as I can. And if the float don't sort of go immediately, I can just lift and drop it and there's one on. I'm feeding quite a lot of squats because I'm wanting to try and make sure something gets to the bottom. I mean, normally when you're squat fishing, feeding a couple of pints of squats is about right. Today I think you could probably get through easily 3 pints because you're trying to feed them fish that's down over at groundbait, and there's so many fish above taking the bait that you've got to be aggressive with it. I'm still fishing quite a small hook. I mean, these fish, they're not that easy to catch normally. I mean, we catch a lot of these, what we call pommies, at Thorn on bloodworm in the winter, and you'd think, they're easy fish to catch, but they're not. The real strange biters, you get real fast bites. I think because of the lift bites today, they're probably easier to catch. But when we catch them at Thorn, they're real quick, fast bites, and they're hard to catch. You need to still be on quite little hooks. We have actually got the national championships on this length of water, the new Junction, next year, and with the amount of fish that's in it, we can really look forward to a terrific national, I would have thought. You can see how many fish is there. I don't know, you probably can see the float in front of me. You can see that it's holding up all the time. If it actually settles, I don't seem to get a bite. It's because you're actually passing these fish. And they're a similar type of fish to what I've caught at places like Porth Reservoir. and often on there you've got to get straight down to the fish, and a lot of bites are lifts, exactly what I've got here today. I'm loose feeding a little bit of hemp short, and later in session I might just have a quick go on hemp. You can see I just lifted that then and dropped it back down, and immediately there's one on, which says to me these fish are just off deck. I mean, when there's not so many fish up shallow, you can catch them with laying the rig out with quite, again, a positive bulk and a little double blocker shot on top of Hoagland. But by laying the rig out and fishing on the drop, keeping everything tight, that's another good way to catch them. I don't think I'll be able to do it today because I think there's probably just too many smaller fish above. But if you just lay the rig out sort of like that and lay it and hold on to it and let everything cock, that's another good way to catch them. But I think, same as I say, I think today there'll just be too many small fish there. I'll bump one anyway. I'll just try that for just 2 or 3 drops in, just to try it. I don't think it'll be as quick as the way I'm catching them now, just dropping straight down, but I'll just try it for a couple of drops in. So I'm just laying the rig out on the water rather than dropping it straight down to them, and what you need to do is keep tight. See, there's a small fish got it on drop already, that. You can see how many fish are up in the water, there's just so many fish there. So you can see why I changed everything to try and get down. There's just too many fish shallow, they just won't allow rig to go down. They're really attacking it all the way down. There's so many fish there, so you can see why you've got to be quite aggressive with the squats. So that's obviously not right, that, just lay it rig out. You've got to get straight down to them. And the rigs I've set up quite a few different rigs. I've got 4 different rigs, from a strung out shallow rig to 2 bulk rigs. And this is the heaviest one I've set up, a 0.8. And even this, I think I could probably even fish a little bit heavier, maybe a gram even. You can see when I drop it straight down to them, there's literally immediately a fish on, and the cracking stamp. I just broke my hook length off. When you're fishing like this, it's quite important to try to get into a rhythm of catching fish. Once you get a nice rhythm going where you're feeding constantly and keeping the fish coming, you can build a weight really quickly. Again, I think because the fish are quite small, a lot of them, I think, you know, fishing with big hooks is not the way forward. You still need to fish. I mean, I'm fishing a nice 20 carbon match, Drennan carbon match, sorry, a 22 Drennan carbon match hook, which is a very small hook, but of course these smaller skimmers, they just suck it straight in, so they take the bait very well. The float I'm using is one of the new ones that Drennan have done. It's got a detachable bristle at the top, but it's also got a titanium stem. Right, and what these stems do, they're not like a heavy wire stem on the base of the float. You never get any tangles. When you've got an heavy wire base, the float can tangle when you're fishing fast, but because these have got a titanium stem to them, they sit in the water real nice, but you don't get any tangles where the float's wrapping round or anything. You see that float's popped up immediately. There's so many fish there. Lovely fishing. You can even go in with a bait that's damaged a little bit and catch. I mean, you know, there's not many days where you can fish with a damaged bait and still catch. I'd love to see what's actually happening down on the bottom where, you know, the ground bait is, whether the fish are eating the ground bait as well. But it really is fantastic fishing. I mean, I've fished this canal a good many times and I've not caught these stamp of silver bream or skimmers. I think they're actually proper skimmers. I've not caught these stamp of fish for a good many years. They're a cracking fish. I mean, normally it's all roach, but I don't think the roach are even getting a look in. I think there's roach there, but they're not getting a look in at all because there's that many of them pommies. You see, I just didn't get a bite there, so I just lifted and dropped it again. If bites do slow, what I'll probably do is cup some more of my ground bait in. You can see odd blows coming up. So there's a lot of fish still on the bottom. Every time I drop down, I'm trying to put the float right on the top of where the actual shot goes in. That one's just come off. Because when you do that, everything straightens up quickly. So your float gets down a lot quicker. You can see I'm taking my time to actually drop that shot. You can see where the bubble is on the surface. And I'm putting the float right in it. So it literally goes straight down and then there's one on immediately. I think if you do take your time and get the presentation better, I mean, I'm trying to talk and fish, which I've never really been good at. If you do get the float sat right on the top of where the block's gone in, it does present the bait better to the fish, because you can imagine them shot, as you put that in, you can see that little bubble. I'm just putting the float right to it. And you can see it set immediately, and there's one on immediately. If you can concentrate and do that, you can catch much quicker. Because everything straightens up above the actual block of shot, and then the bait actually travels down in a straight line. Your bait actually passes that block and presents nicely as if it's loose feed coming down. I learnt this quite a few years ago fishing on the canal, is to actually put the float right where the bubble is. You can see immediately there's one on. And that's because I'm concentrating. That one's come off. Concentrating and trying to make sure that everything's straight. And then you get a better bait presentation. I'm just fishing a single white pinky, which is just mimicking the squats that I'm feeding. And of course they're easier to pick up and easier to put on hook. The squats I've got are quite small. You can see I'm feeding a lot of squats to try and keep the fish there. Normally I'd probably be feeding only a quarter of that if I were fishing for roach. I think it's getting to the point where I'm just starting to maybe think about probably introducing some more ground bait. And what I'll do, I'll just cut maybe 2 or 3 balls in. I've caught for so long fishing on the bottom and really fed squats quite aggressive, trying to keep the fish down, but after a little while, even after feeding ground bait, I found that the fish were just really wanting to come up. So I've picked up a shallow rig. I've picked up a 0.1 AS2 float and gone shallow. And to be honest, it's been absolutely brilliant. I've managed to step up to a slightly bigger hook. I've put a size 20 carbon match on. I'm just fishing with a strung out rig and literally laying it out on the water through the squats and feeding, still quite aggressive. There's so many fish there that, you know, I just feel if I keep feeding, I just catch a decent stamp of fish. I'm catching perch, roach and skimmers shallow. Now I've kept the length of line quite long, which, because the conditions is really good, it just means that I'm shipping back with quite a long top. So I'm not having to ship off too much pole, I'm shipping just 3 sections of pole. And it's made it so I've caught really quickly. You've got to really be a little bit patient with bites almost and let them have it. But I'm catching quicker now than what I was actually catching on the bottom, because your rig's not having to travel to the bottom. You can just literally ship out and flick the rig over. I just use the pole and flick it over so it straightens everything out. I'm not flicking it out, I'm flicking it sideways, so I'm right in among the loose feed. And it's just a case of a sideways strike. I've got a lighter elastic on because I'm fishing shallow. On the bottom rig I had a number 4 elastic, a Preston 4 elastic. But now I've gone shallow, I've gone on a slightly lighter elastic. I'm on a number 3. And there's a reason for this. When you're fishing shallow, you need to strike fairly soft, really. And also to the side. And you don't want the fish coming to the top, you want the fish to stay down. And of course, if you've got an heavier elastic, the fish comes and splashes on the surface, and you don't really want that. You want the fish to stay down when you hook it, so the elastic's a little bit lighter. It really is fantastic fishing, it's great fishing. There's so many fish here now, it's unbelievable. And I'm catching, I mean, that's an hybrid that. There's a right mix of fish. There's some skimmers, some perch, some hybrids, there's roach as well. There's everything up shallow, and it just shows you that, you know, our waters, certainly our canals, are just really stuffed with fish at the moment. And I think it's because we've probably had such a warm summer. You can see I'm really waiting and letting them, making sure that the bites are on, because if you strike too early, you just seem to bump an odd fish and miss them. But you can almost see line going behind float, and you know that the fish has, you know, took the bait very well. I'll actually show you this rig in a little while, because I've got a little block of shots that sets the float up and then just strung out number 12s below, so that the float actually sets and then the number 12s start to fall through water. Just bump that one. But this is probably one of the best days I've ever had for squat fishing. It's not usual to catch as well as this. I mean, you know, I'm sat here on my own, I'm not in match conditions, but to be honest, last time I fished on here I caught about 13, 14 pound, and a lot of them fish I caught on squat. So, you know, it tells you there's a lot of fish in this venue. It's still speed of bite that allows you to catch quickly. You know, it doesn't matter how good your rigs are or anything. If you're not getting a quick bite, you can't catch quick. And it's always the same. If you're going to catch quickly, you want the float to go under quickly. I'm sure there's probably still fish on bottom. I mean, I fed 3 or 4 balls via a cup to try and keep the fish down, but you could almost tell that, you know, the fish were wanting to come up all the time. And these skimmers, some of them weigh sort of, you know, going 4 ounce, I would have thought. So you're building a good weight all the time. I love fishing like this. When you're fishing, you know, plenty of bait, being quite aggressive, and coming back with a fish all the time, it's just a rhythm that you've got to try and get into. And when you get a nice rhythm, you know, you can catch really quickly. I'm still feeding a little bit of hemp short, but I've not really had a go on it, and I can't see me doing, because this is so good on the Squatt. But you can see when I'm not concentrating and letting that float go properly, I'm missing the bite. You can almost pick the bites that's on. Them little dibs and things, just ignore them until you get a proper bite. Once you get a proper bite, it's on every time. All sorts of fish. I mean, even perch, you know, the good little stampers. I'm not fishing heavy hook lengths. I've only got 074 in the Supplex fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon's ever so good when you're catching fish quickly because it doesn't twist. No, normal monofilament tends to twist a little bit, where your fluorocarbon, when you're fishing quick, your bait doesn't spin the same. So fluorocarbon's a nice line to fish like this. It might surprise you that I use fluorocarbon all the time when I'm bloodworm fishing. Same thing, you never get any twist of the line. And when you're bloodworm fishing, you're almost putting like a little propeller on the line, and it does tend to twist. But with fluorocarbon, it's a little bit stiffer than normal monofilament. But what it is, it's also invisible in water. So, you know, you've got several advantages there with using fluorocarbon. And of course the Supplex fluorocarbon's very strong. I mean, when you go to like 015 for like carp fishing, it's almost unbreakable. You can tell some bites that's not on. They're just, when it goes really quickly, you know it's going to come back up. A lot of them's these skimmers. These skimmers are devils for it. I used to use B511, Kamasan B511s, the silver one, for nearly all this type of fishing. But I've moved on to carbon match because they're a little bit stronger, and when you're catching a lot of fish, I mean, it's with height at summer, there's a lot of fish to catch. And these hooks, they just don't bend, so you know, when you're catching a lot of fish, you're not worried about bending the hook. And you can see how quick I'm coming back with your fish, and you know, the last thing you'd want to be doing is messing about bending a hook back or whatever. These, they're rarely fish come off them. They're a slightly turned in hook. Bait goes on them very well as well. They're ever so sharp. Great for fishing squats and pinkies. I would have thought today I could have probably caught a little bit closer in than this. Maybe even caught on a whip, which would have been quite interesting. I've never really tried to fish a whip on the canal, but there's so many fish that you think you would probably catch on it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take a time out now. I think I've probably caught enough fish, and I'm just going to talk you through the rigs that I'm using and the elastics and the setup and the reasons why. I think that's probably just as important as to tell you why I've changed rigs about and what I've finished up with. But you can see how many squats I'm feeding all the time. I mean, You know, that's a lot of bait, but it seems necessary to keep them fish up there. I mean, I wouldn't like to count how many individual squats I'm actually feeding, but I would have thought it's a good amount. But when there's this many fish, you know, you've got to feed that much. It's simple. I'm using just a Delicat with a new pouch on that. It's a nice piece of equipment for when you're feeding a lot of squats. Whoop. That was a little bit big to swing, really. So I'll take a time out and I'll talk you through the rigs that I'm using. Yesterday we looked at the rigs in the tackle room what I expected to possibly use today, and I set up 4 rigs. When I got here this morning, we'd got perfect conditions, it was flat calm, and I started fishing, but quickly realised that things weren't quite right. I mean, normally when you're fishing with squats, there's not this many fish available to catch. I mean, normally you're fishing for maybe, you know, 10 or 12 pounds, a very good weight. Today there's been a lot more fish to catch than that. And when I started fishing on the drop like I would normally with squats, fishing with just a strung out rig and a bulk, but quickly realised that I just couldn't get the rig to the bottom. It didn't matter how many squats I fed, even putting a big pouch in and fishing for a little while, I couldn't keep the fish, or I couldn't keep the small fish from taking the bait on the drop. So I realised that there were some small skimmers, these skimmers that's been 3 or 4 ounce, that's been real weight builders down on the ground bait. So what I did, I changed the rig completely, and the 0.8 rig that I set off with a block of shot and strung out, I quickly just bulked all the shots together right on the top of the hook length. Now this is not a normal way to fish, but of course when there's lots of fish present above where you're fishing, smaller fish, and there's some bigger fish down on the ground bit, it's the only way to get down there. So what I was doing, I was dropping the bulk in, as you could see, and putting the float right on the top of the bulk, so everything's set immediately. And what that does then, by keeping everything straight above, your hook bait then passes almost in a straight line. So it's almost, your bait's presented at its best almost, because it's fishing exactly with the bait that's falling through the water. And because there were a lot of fish competing, they'd take the bait and hang on to it. So the block of shot above were not really a problem. I mean, a lot of the bites, they were just lifting that bulk up, so the float was sitting up. So I caught really well on that rig, as aggressive and really as rough and ready as it looks. It was a terrific rig this morning when I first started catching over the ground bait area. But once I'd fished for a while, I did try potting in an amount of ground bait and starting things off again when things slowed a little bit. But of course, the reason it had slowed is because a lot of the fish had come shallow. And that's what I did. I picked up a shallow rig just to have a quick look to see what was shallow. Now the rig I picked up was set quite a bit deeper than this. It's probably, I don't know, I've caught fish as shallow as 1 metre deep, and this is probably just a little bit over 1 metre now as the rig that I finished off. I said it were a 0.1 float, it wasn't, it were a 0.2 SF1. Now the 0.2 rig, I fished with a little bulk of shots and just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 number 12s below it, and literally fished on the drop right in among all the loose feed, the loose fed squats, and caught really well. Finished up using a 20 hook. I stepped up to a 20 hook to catch them, and fishing with double pinky just picked out the bigger fish, so I had a real good run of fish shallow. So that's the main 2 rigs that I've used. Now, normally for squat fishing with a rig like this, maybe a foot off bottom, is usually quite good. And then fishing with a strung out bulk, a bulk of shot, and then a strung out of string of shots below that normally works very well as well. So today has been a little bit different of way I've approached things, because there's been so many fish here, and it just, you know, it's a mark of how good the new Junction Canal is. And the sad thing is, I'm the only angler on the bank today, which, you know, as far as I can see either side, there's no other anglers, and this place is just full of fish.